people and it doesn't work. Yeah. So my work really spans across all three of the goal areas: climate, curriculum, and instruction. The article I wrote for the Gazette is mostly focused on the instructional elements.
Okay.
And I think, we think about curriculum, it's really what we're teaching. Instruction is really how we're teaching it. And the climate is what's the overall feeling in the room and how do relationships get built between students, teachers, and students. So really all three are integral and they're all interconnected. So I'll talk a bit more about instruction today, but they're really like three legs that hold up a stool that if one is not in place, the other two can't be successful. So for instruction, I think three of our real focuses this year, and really heading towards next year as well, as we are kind of like doing budgets for next year and really planning, finishing this year and making sure kids have a great experience for the second half of the year, as well as thinking about what are we going to put in place in the future year and how does that tie to the budget. One of the areas is ensuring that our students have a rigorous academic experience. And academic, I don't mean what some people might think of as just, reading, writing, math, but really all areas. And rigor is a really misunderstood word. Rigor, some people think of rigor as how much homework you have at night. And how
difficult it is.
How difficult it is and how tired kids are when they come home from school. And for us, really, rigor's focus on engagement, relevancy of the curriculum, and how are students actually using what they're learning, so that it's not a theoretical or philosophical conversation. Those are great, but then what's the application pieces so that students know what they're learning is actually relevant to their lives or the lives of others.
And you said that they know that it's relevant.
Exactly.
That's a critical part of it.
I think so, because I think being a former teacher, we know what the lesson plans are, we know the standards, and we have our own perspectives being adults, having lived in the world longer than our students have. And if we're not communicating and planning well for students to know what the relevancy of our curriculum is, it really doesn't work, and our students become disengaged and dismotivated, unmotivated in the work. If they're not engaged, they're not going to be challenged. It's not possible. And we have a diverse range of learners, so it's offering different modalities, different learning styles for students to be able to access that curriculum, recognize its value, and think critically. And maybe the thinking piece is maybe the underreported part of rigor. Rigor is not only exemplified in grades and quantity of homework and grade level equivalency. What's the critical thinking skills that students are encountering? How are they able to solve problems? How are they reflective about what they just learned? How do they have the metacognition that's going to help them the next time they encounter something that's more challenging that they haven't seen before?
And how do you know?
Right. We don't want that process to be new every time. Oh, this is something I don't know. What do I do? We really want to build that metacognition of I have a toolkit that I can access so that I can get over challenges as they come up. And that really has to be embedded in the instructional methodology that our teachers are using so that we have successful students who are confident, who think critically about themselves and their learning, think critically about others, and think critically about learning.
So is this a new process, or has this been ongoing, or is this something different that we're doing now?
I think it's not new, as in we've thought about this for a while. I think unfortunately the political mood around education nationally, when people describe rigor, in my opinion, is inappropriate, right? It gets to quantifying it in a number of minutes on homework and that type of thing, which may have no relevancy to actually student learning.
So Mike, how do you know that those models are translating to the day-to-day experience of the children?
Absolutely.
Like, how do you measure that? I know we test for the skills, but how do you test or how do you know that the children are critical thinkers and engaged in that way?
So I think there's a couple ways, and this is a great example of what we talked about earlier. It really goes into climate. So one of the things at our secondary school level that we just have completed are climate surveys of every student in our middle school and high school and Southeast campus. And while some of the questions are focused on relationships with teachers and those sort of climate things, many of the questions students and teachers responded to are really about teaching and learning, and trying to get a sense of the level of engagement, the connection between the teacher, the student, and the content, and the relationship between those three.
And understanding the perception of the child gives you that information.
Exactly. And we get the perception of the child and the perception of the teacher with the same questions. So we're really looking at where do the adults in our district and the students feel similarly, and where's there a mismatch, and why is there a mismatch, and how do we address that? So that's something that's new this year that we did, and we're just starting to look at the results.
That's exciting.
Very soon. And it is exciting because it's the narratives are always going to be important when students share their narratives with us, and not every student has the opportunity to share their narrative in a really public way because of the quantity of students. And this is really going to give us some data that we can use along with student narratives to take a look at how are students feeling in our schools and how are they perceiving the teaching and learning program that we have. In addition, I would also add that as standards have changed and our curriculum has changed, we are asking students questions that are much less rote memorization focused. So I can think of when I was a student growing up, many of the tasks I was given to complete were really around had I memorized what was taught.
Yes.
And I don't want to minimize that because I think there's some value in computational fluency in math, for instance, in fluency. But really we are focused on that balance. And the point of having computational fluency and reading fluency is that we're able to access those critical thinking deeper skills. So both instructional methodology that gets students talking more, the less the sage on the stage model, and really focused on students being actively involved in the lesson, as well as the assessments they're taking, less focused on rote memorization, more focused on deeper learning and understanding and application of what's learned.
Now, for teachers who are used to the more traditional models and methods, is it difficult to transition to?
So I think for our teachers, again, I want to compliment them. We have great models in our district of teachers who have always been teaching in this way.
Sure.
And we also have, our staff is incredibly inspiring in terms of their willingness to do what kids need. And I think there's a general understanding that in 2015, those needs are different than they were even 10, 15 years ago.
Sure.
And we need our kids actively engaged, working with teachers, being involved in lessons, the student voice coming up more often. It's really meeting students where they are. So I've been really pleased to walk in classrooms empty quite frequently and see the type of instruction that I'm seeing and see students being engaged in lessons and hands up and really owning the learning. And I think it's a process that all of us go, it's a lifelong process. Teaching education is one of those things you never get. You're always thinking, what's the next thing? What else can I do to support students? But I've been really pleased to see the growth that our staff, how much our staff has taken on. I want everybody to feel like they can be a leader in the school. And that goes for students, families, teachers, administrators. That really there are some formal roles in schools because that's what makes schools function. But really some of those structures can go away if someone has a great idea. Because I think one thing that organizations struggle with is how do we get ideas to make ourselves better? And sometimes we have formal planning processes, and that's valuable. But I guess the thing I'd want to do is where, regardless of role, if someone has an innovation, that I'm hearing about it and I'm sharing it, and people can benefit from it. So I know that's pretty ivory tower sounding, maybe, hopefully not. But I do feel that I also would want to say what everyone feels like a card-carrying member of the school, and the school district and the school community. That it's not a casual thing that I work for the Amherst Public Schools, the regional schools, or I have a student, a child in the schools, or I am a child in the schools. That there's really a sense of pride that they're part of something great, and they're part of something in a way that not only by default, but by actively being a part of it. And so that card-carrying phrase that I use really gets at me because I almost wish there was literally, these aren't quite cards. But I think, I want that investment and that engagement in the work, and that doesn't mean everything's going to be smooth all the time, and I think, I know I'm fine with things not being smooth all the time, but there's a respectful dialogue that occurs when people are trying to improve the experience of everyone who's part of our district.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great vision.
You think?